Can you believe that we're about to hit the 4-year anniversary of the PlayStation 5? The release of the PS5 Pro is on the horizon, at least at the time I'm recording this, which means we're just about officially halfway through the generation, and a lot has happened over the past 4 years. So, let's look back and see what Sony has gotten right and wrong this generation so far. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and this is PlayStation 5, 7 ups and 6 downs after 4 years. Strap in, this is going to be a long one. Let's start with the ups. Number 7, smart second-party game investment. This generation has been defined by big-name company acquisitions, but Sony hasn't joined in for the sake of it. Sure, there have been some smaller purchases, but nothing on the level of the competition, especially that $70 billion Activision acquisition. Instead, the company has arguably made the smarter move and focused on strengthening second-party relationships. Across 2024 especially, we've seen second-party exclusives bolster the PS5 in the absence of a strong first-party slate. Despite Microsoft's insane collection of excellent in-house devs, it has actually been Sony's PS5 exclusives that have dominated the culture and sales this year. Helldivers 2, for instance, became a huge success at the start of 2024, outperforming even first-party giants like Marvel's Spider-Man 2, while a steady stream of high-profile exclusives such as Rise of the Ronin, Stellar Blade, Silent Hill 2, and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth have given PS5 owners plenty to play. And that's not even mentioning the smaller scale titles exclusively released for the consoles, such as Pacific Drive, one of my absolute favourite games of the year so far. And this is all on top of accidental exclusives that have come to PS5 sooner than Xbox. For instance, Xbox missed out on the console launch of Baldur's Gate 3 last year due to its insistence on parity between the Series S and X, leaving Sony with an unexpected console exclusive that just so happened to be the best received game of the year. Then there's been this year's Black Myth Wukong. While reports have been muddy on whether this was supposed to be an exclusive or was another result of the developers having trouble with the series line of consoles, the result remains a major win for Sony, with the game becoming one of the most played single-player releases of all time. Literally, just as I'm recording this, there's actually an internal investigation being launched by Microsoft to figure out why developers are preferring to work with Sony on their console and why they're finding it difficult to work with the Xbox. Something along the way has gone wrong. This second-party approach then has been a win-win for both players and the company. For us, it's meant a whole bunch of exclusives to play across a whole load of different genres, and for Sony, it has given them a string of commercially successful titles to bolster their portfolio across off years when their first-party studios need more time to cook, and they haven't had to buy up the studios to get those games. Number 6, PS Plus finally rivals Game Pass. Alright, so I might have been tempted to go all out and title this section just PlayStation Plus beats Game Pass, but honestly, until Microsoft's service moves completely away from dropping their first-party exclusives on their day one, that declaration would just never sit right. That is such an ace up Microsoft's sleeve. However, while Game Pass was once unquestionably the best deal in gaming, PlayStation Plus Extra and Premium are now in a position where they can handily rival the selection of free games offered by the competition. It would of course be a bit redundant to run through everything on there in this section, but their selection is robust, ranging from incredible indies like Disco Elysium, Dredge, and Inscription, to first-party classics like Ghost of Tsushima, Spider-Man, and Uncharted Legacy of Thieves Collection, to old-school hidden gems like Toy Story 3, Dino Crisis, and the Time Splitters trilogy. It's a tantalizing library that covers all of PlayStation history, with the recent additions of PSVR 2 games finally welcoming all parts of the publisher's hardware ecosystem. There is still work to be done, of course, and personal preference will always come into play as to which service certain players will prefer, but you can't knock the breadth of high-quality games that PlayStation now has to offer for a monthly fee. They certainly have come a long way since 2020. Number 5, first-party PS5 games have been consistently great. There's been a lot of contention over Sony's frequency of first-party exclusives this generation. A part of that stems from the argument that a lot of releases can't actually be classed as true PS5 games due to them also releasing on last-gen systems. However, putting that aside for a second and just analysing exactly what Sony's first-party studios have produced since 2020, it is clear that they have hit the ground running in a way that they were unable to do during the early years of the PS4. To begin, we have an incredible launch lineup of games that evolved into a sensational first year of first-party titles. 2020 kicked the generation off with Demon's Souls, Spider-Man Miles Morales and Spider-Man Remastered, Sackboy: A Big Adventure, and Astro's Playroom. Just a few months later, Sony published Returnal and Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, alongside remasters and director's cuts for Ghost of Tsushima and Uncharted. Since then, we've seen Horizon Forbidden West, Gran Turismo 7, God of War Ragnarok, The Last of Us Part 1, Marvel's Spider-Man 2, The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered, Concord, and Astrobot. And of course, the only game that really stands out from that set is Concord, with the rest being mostly excellent experiences. Now, I honestly don't want to get drawn into any console war BS, but to just compare that to the competition for a second, in that same time period, Xbox's first-party studios have released Forza Horizon 5, great game, Halo Infinite, Forza Motorsport, Grounded, Pentiment, Hi-Fi Rush, Senua's Saga, Hellblade 2, and Starfield, another game I really love. While there are some great games there, though, it is also important to note that Grounded, Pentiment, and Hi-Fi Rush have all since come to PS5 as well. This isn't to say that PlayStation's first 4 years have been perfect by any means. I mean, you can argue that we should have seen more new IPs and fewer safer sequels, and that a lot of these games can be played on a base PS4. But the first-party bangers have been just that, bangers that we're getting more frequently than we did even last generation. Number 4, the DualSense is way more than a gimmick. Sony has been criticised by some players for its controller gimmicks across the past couple of generations. The light bar on the PS4 proved to be divisive, while many assumed the same would be true of the PS5's DualSense, with its focus on adaptive triggers and haptic technology. However, the DualSense has consistently proven itself as the next step in video game controllers, providing sometimes subtle but effective feedback to accentuate the action happening on screen. When used to its fullest potential, as it was recently in Astrobot, the DualSense can help create the illusion of that extra dimension, emphasizing the tactility of controlling a character on the screen. The audio implementation aids this overall feeling as well, with the controller's speaker complementing a game's overall sound design. It's one of those innovations that you can easily take for granted if you're using it all the time, but going back to the PS4 and the DualShock 4, it's easy to feel that something is missing to the overall gaming experience, and hopefully Sony only iterates on these features going forward. Number 3, Astrobot means more than you think to PlayStation. Alright, so this one may not be as seismic as the rest of the ups on this list, but Astrobot finally being given the spotlight and headlining his own game on Sony's primary piece of hardware is a big deal. On the one hand, it's just great that Team Asobi's talent can finally be appreciated by the mainstream, not just evangelical PSVR heads like myself. Astrobot is one of the best games of the year, no matter which console you prefer. A love letter to platformers that both pays homage to and further innovates on the biggest and best names in the genre. More than just a singular game, though, Astrobot also marks the first time that Sony has been able to, convincingly anyway, mascotize the PlayStation brand as a whole. While other companies, namely Nintendo, have seen great joy and success of bringing together all the different characters under their brand, either to create crossover experiences or just unified marketing, PlayStation, I feel, has always struggled. Not lacking in equally recognizable and compelling characters, previous attempts like PlayStation All-Stars missed the mark completely, seeming more like soulless brand exercises than actual joyful games. You know, kind of Space Jam 2 in comparison to Space Jam. With Astrobot, though, PlayStation has now found a way to bring together all the disparate parts of its history under one celebratory roof. Sure, there is still valid criticism that the game is essentially marketing you the ecosystem that you've already bought into, but Astrobot feels more genuine than it does cynical, and proves that adult-only characters in franchises like God of War can be appealing to all audiences. Finally, it's just nice to see Sony make a game that isn't a third-person action-adventure title, and hopefully this ushers in a focus on a wider breadth of genres, but more on that later. Number 2, PSVR 2 is an excellent companion console. Listen, I don't know how else to say it at this point. PSVR 2 rules. I hear your arguments about the price, I understand the complaints that Sony hasn't sufficiently supported it with must-play games, but as a companion to the PS5, it absolutely is excellent. While it's probably not worth it if you already own a solid PC VR system, PSVR 2 is great for newcomers. The incredible selection of games, most of which are upgraded classics like Pavlov and Pistol Whip, offer some of the industry's finest gaming experiences. They're all enhanced as well by PSVR 2's superb array of tech upgrades, including the spot-on and hugely reliable controllers, foveated rendering and haptic feedback. And then you have the actual exclusives, which, while not exactly plentiful, all hit a huge bar of quality. Despite not being initially made for the system, Resident Evil 8 and Resident Evil 4 VR are some of the greatest VR games on the market, no doubt, with the latter especially being particularly transformed by the jump from third to first person. Then there's the likes of Call of the Mountain, Gran Turismo 7, and the Dark Pictures Switchback, all must-play titles. If the original PSVR was a proof of concept, then its successor is the real deal, with quality experiences dropping for it on the regular. Number 1. Insomniac has been PS5's MVP. Insomniac is proving to be one of the shrewdest investments in Sony's history. Though the two companies shared a long history that brought the likes of Ratchet & Clank and Resistance into the PlayStation ecosystem, it wasn't until 2019 that Insomniac was actually purchased and became an in-house developer. And in the age of billion-dollar acquisitions, Insomniac's price point actually kinda looks like a typo. Sold for $229 million in 2019, less than the reported budget for Spider-Man 2, by the way, the studio has proven to be the console maker's most consistent and frequent moneymakers across this generation. In the 4 years since the acquisition alone, they've produced 4 games, with Spider-Man Miles Morales, Spider-Man 2, Spider-Man Remastered, and Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. Those titles alone have sold, at the very least, a combined total of 30 million copies, no doubt paying off Sony's investment a bunch of times over. Even better, Insomniac was also first out the gate and the first-party studio to announce a game slated for release in the second half of the generation, though in the recent State of Play, we did finally get a look at Ghost of Yotei, which again, looks awesome. In a generation where we're still yet to see a true PS5 exclusive from many of Sony's first-party big hitters, Insomniac has consistently been knocking it out of the park. Alright, that is all the good stuff. Go get yourself a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or whatever you want, and we will get into the downs right now. Number 6, the live service pivot didn't work. Alright, this one isn't even really down to personal opinion. Sony itself has admitted that its all-in focus on live service games for this generation has not been the success that it imagined. In the Jim Ryan era, internal presentations show how PlayStation were ramping up their investment in multiplayer games, while publicly advertising how they had 12 live service games in development at one point. While this filled many longtime fans with dread, who pointed to the many live service failures across the last decade as to why this was a bad idea, the games Sony started to unveil and announce didn't do much to sway opinion. The likes of Bungie's Marathon and Fair Games looked fine at best, whereas early attempts at live service formats like Destruction All-Stars completely crashed and burned. There was clearly trouble internally to nail this new vision, with The Last of Us Factions being completely cancelled years after it was first announced, and Concord becoming one of Sony's biggest bombs in 2024. The writing was on the wall for a while, and in spite of Helldivers 2 going on to prove the formula could work in the right hands, it was no surprise in late 2023 when Sony's president confirmed that they were scaling down their live service plans. They haven't been dropped for good, admittedly. I mean, there is way too much money to make in this business after all, but it's no longer the complete pivot that was initially planned, with the planned games dropping from 12 to just 6. Thank the Lord. Number 5, state of plays still aren't great. Okay, so state of plays aren't outright bad, but Sony's answer to the Nintendo Direct should be far better executed than it currently is. These glimpses into PlayStation's upcoming slate have virtually replaced standard E3-esque showcases that the company used to rely on, offering semi-regular updates on the latest games in bite-sized chunks every quarter or so. Not a bad idea in theory, but the announcements themselves in these videos, as well as the lack of panache in the production of the presentations, has led to state of plays being associated with disappointment. Now, this is a bit more complicated than it may appear. On the one hand, the audience, myself included, can get carried away with their expectations for these shows. They are, after all, not full showcases, and the blog post that accompanies the announcement that one is happening usually lays out what you can and cannot expect, sometimes completely ruling out first-party involvement, a focus on indies, or what have you. That said, you also can't blame the audience for getting their hopes up when the state of plays have entirely replaced the regular showcase rollout that we used to have, where E3 would come with the expectations of big reveals and surprise game drops. PlayStation keeps things close to their vest these days, which has resulted in a desire to see what the hell they have cooking, and when they reveal what they're working on, it often isn't as glamorous as we are all expecting it to be. Fortunately, I do think they are getting better. The recent production quality of State of Plays has made them much more engaging packages to watch, while the selection of games shown off has been solid overall. It's not quite there yet, but let's hope these improvements keep coming. Number 4, fumbling the PS5 Pro. A price point can make or break a console. We've seen it before with Sony losing the goodwill of players following the announcement of the PS3, or winning it back by undercutting the Xbox One back in 2013. As the past continues to repeat itself, however, the company shocked gamers across the globe by announcing that the PS5 Pro would retail at an astonishing $700. That was tough to swallow, even for fans like myself who were expecting it to fetch a hefty price tag regardless. In the lead up to the announcement, the prominent rumor suggested that 2 versions would launch, one being discless that hovered around the mid $500 range, and a disc version that would release around $650. This already seemed very, very steep, but for the final machine to clock in higher than both rumored price points without a disc drive, well, it felt more like a typo again than anything else. Okay, and let's address that lack of disc drive first. On the one hand, it seems mad that a Pro version of a console, a name usually associated with a complete package that provides all the bells and whistles of any given piece of technology, could boast that name while omitting such an important feature. Yes, digital games often make up the majority of sales, but the physical market and boutique consoles like this go hand in hand. Not to mention the disc drive's ability to keep PS5 playing 4K Blu-ray movies and TV shows. The lack of a disc drive also makes it unappealing for those with a regular PS5 to feel incentivized to trade it in, as they're either going to have to sacrifice a core part of the machine that they're losing, or shell out more money to replace it. And that brings us to the additional disc drive that Sony sells separately for $70, which, also adding in the additional vertical stand, feels as though the consumer is being fleeced for every part of this machine. And yeah, look, I know that on paper the tech inside the PS5 Pro is apparently worth the price they're charging, especially with the extra hard drive space included. But selling a console, or anything really, is as much about feeling as though you're getting a good deal for your money, rather than just knowing it in an abstract way. And with its lack of premier games, high price point, and lack of features, the PS5 Pro just does not feel like a good deal. It feels like you're kind of getting ripped off. Number 3, no new AAA IP. Now, it's not fair to say that PlayStation hasn't seen any new IP this generation, but in comparison to previous eras, the focus has been overwhelmingly on furthering established franchises through sequels, remasters, and remakes. As mentioned, a lot of these have been amazing, but it feels as though we're still waiting for that one new idea that really establishes what the PS5 is going to be remembered for. The PS4's bread and butter, after all, was taking risks on new blockbuster IP and then reaping the rewards. With those 8 years seeing the likes of Horizon Zero Dawn, Days Gone, Ghost of Tsushima, Bloodborne, Spider-Man, Death Stranding, Astrobot, Drive Club, and even Knack all hit the machine. And while a couple of those didn't quite hit the mark, it is impressive just how many did and now serve as the marquee franchises for the PS5. Perhaps it is a little greedy to keep demanding more, but a more balanced portfolio between original titles and safer sequels is surely better for the PlayStation ecosystem overall. Returnal was a great start, and the rumored new IP from Santa Monica and Naughty Dog would be welcomed should they arrive sooner rather than later, but so far it's been the safest generation from PlayStation. And even worse, the new IP that we have gotten, namely Concord and Fair Games, were wrapped up in the live service push that I've already talked about. Number 2, the Bungie acquisition has flopped. Unlike the acquisition of Insomniac, Sony's 2022 purchase of Bungie has so far not been a success. Right from the start, the deal seemed strange. While it made sense that the company would target such a successful developer, one that had succeeded in the realm of live service, which, as we've established, Sony was looking to break into, the terms of this merger always made Bungie an anomaly. Most important was the clarification that Bungie was keeping a level of autonomy separate from the wider PlayStation Corporation and would be continuing to publish multi-platform games. The rumors and reports in the years since suggested that, rather than exclusive games, the acquisition was primarily for Bungie's live service know-how. PlayStation's plan included producing a whole bunch of live service games with their in-house teams that didn't have any kind of experience with the genre. So, being able to access Bungie's in-house talent and technology to shape this new approach and offer advice made sense on paper. Of course, we've covered how this plan has so far failed, producing more bombs than successes, but even Bungie themselves, despite being viewed as the masters of live service, have struggled to maintain their own, with Destiny 2 on the decline and the studio allegedly missing development targets for all of their current projects. So with Destiny on the downturn, Bungie's live service knowledge no longer as important to the wider PlayStation brand, and the inability to produce exclusive games, what exactly has Sony gotten out of this billion-dollar deal, apart from a whole load of hot air? Number 1, we've lost amazing studios. Though Sony hasn't been the only gaming company to announce mass layoffs over the past couple of years, I mean, seriously, it would be easier to name the studios that haven't been on a sacking spree. They have nonetheless shut down or gutted some incredible talent since the start of the generation. A few months before the release of the PS5, it was announced that Sony's Manchester studio was being shuttered, while a year later, Japan studio, known for its wide array of beloved games including Bloodborne and Gravity Rush, was also closed down, with only Team Asobi remaining as part of PlayStation. Another round of layoffs saw Bungie hit in 2023 and 2024, with London studio being shut down completely, along with layoffs and restructuring occurring at Firesprite. What's tough is that these teams, while not bringing in Spider-Man level numbers, did help to give PlayStation an edge outside of the mainstream. Japan Studios' work in its titular country awarded the studio with an internal Japanese focus that feels markedly missing from the more Americanized company of today. I mean, just look at what I mentioned about second-party studio and how they're having to rely on other developers like Shift Up to bring them games like Stellar Blade or Rise of the Ronin or Final Fantasy in lieu of its own in-house material, whereas the likes of London Studio and Firesprite were delivering first-party software for the PSVR that machine is sorely lacking. Overall, it's just sad to see these storied studios either gone entirely or cut down, while it's equally frustrating that the younger teams will no longer be able to fulfill their potential. Whew, that was a biggie. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. How have you found the first half of the generation for PlayStation so far, and what are you hoping they tweak going forward? Let me know, and if you could, please give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to What Culture for more lists like this, and news like this, and editorials like this every single day. But for now, I've been Josh. See you later.